Welcome back to the Flow Show podcast. It's been quite some time since I last showed up on this podcast. Today we have the wonderful Katie Jonzen, and she is a light worker. And I have done a few coaching sessions with her. And today's episode is going to be all about finding inner peace and what it really means, the journey back into wholeness. What does it really mean to heal from grief? Finding the answers within ourselves and also searching deeper. One that I know Katie has a lot of wisdom to share, and I personally have taken away a lot of notes from her coaching calls and simply from her Instagram reels in itself. So I'm excited for you guys, for her to share the wisdom with you and really impart that knowledge. I've learned so much from her. And she's also the founder of the Seed of Peace podcast. It's such an honor to be able to have her here to share the wisdom. So without further ado, let's get started in today's episode.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm really excited to be part of this. And thank you also for introducing me as the host of the Seed of Peace podcast, which I haven't been devoted to recently, but I will get back into.
Today's topic is going to be one that's surrounded by healing, and it's all about the journey of finding inner peace. So we talk about a lot on what exactly finding peace off the mat means, but what does it really mean to heal, and what is the definition of healing? And we circle so much around this topic because I think a lot of the times we get caught up in trying to fix a relational problem or relationship issue, and having had experienced my own set of trying to chase after a certain outcome working with Katie, and you get caught up in a spiral and you realize that a lot of the times you need to break out of that shell yourself first, and it takes a lot of breaking out to be able to circle back to yourself. And I really want to start off and say that coaching is something that I've always been resistant to because Katie is Bali based, but there are a lot of coaches, business coaches, mentors, for many different kinds of educational reasons, yoga mentors. But what really drew me to Katie's work is the way she phrases. So I want to start off by asking, what exactly is healing and coming back to ourselves really mean?
Thank you so much for that share and for the question as well. I think it's a really important question to ask ourselves, especially in this context of how healing is talked about so much on social media and how everyone is on this healing journey. I noticed myself getting a little bit, triggered at how people would refer to healing and being on this healing journey, because I saw how it was almost just this other extension of unworthiness programming playing out. It's like, oh, are you not doing the work? Are you not healing? I think the irony of the healing journey, the way that we're viewing it these days, is that we're looking at it from this perspective of there's something wrong with me and I'm broken and I need to be fixed. But if you look at the etymology of the word heal, it means whole, right? So actually the healing journey is really about embodying our inherent wholeness. And I try not to stick to too many like narratives or stories, but I like the idea that we arrived as these whole beings, right? And somewhere along the way, life has a way of denting us and leaving certain impacts. And the healing journey is really about looking at these areas where we've been dented, where these impressions have been left on what is actually inherently whole, and sort of just teasing out those dents. And even then, I don't like this analogy so much because it still speaks to that feeling of being bruised or affected or being damaged. And we're not damaged goods. I think that's something that's very, very important to remember. Is like, I think at the moment we're in this mindset where we're looking at ourselves as damaged goods and we're deeming ourselves as unworthy of love or all the good things because we are damaged. And this is really not the case. But I see a lot of beauty in the experience of trauma, right? Because trauma by definition is essentially something that has yet to be processed, So a lot of trauma obviously tends to happen in the early years of life, but you can get traumatized right now, right? If you're at a space where you do not have the capacity for whatever reason to process what is happening to you in the moment, that gets stored either somatically or psychologically as trauma that then needs to be dealt with further down the line. What I find quite beautiful about this design is as soon as you have built the capacity to process that which has not been processed, it will come up, right? So whether it seems that it's being triggered by external life situations, what is actually happening is that trauma is resurfacing and asking to be processed. And what that does is it brings us on this deeper journey within to truly meet more and more of that inherent wholeness that we arrived as.
I love this because I remember in one of our calls as well, and I actually really love this because when we're caught up in our own thoughts, it's honestly suffocating. And I know that a lot of the times what we think is what we act, and the narratives that we tell ourselves, because I'm my own biggest critique. And, it's very hard to pace yourself and it's very hard to breathe. And I love how you said it's about widening the capacity to see that there is more there. You know, in your Instagram, I know you said there are 10 truths that you now believe about someone who is depressed for 15 years. And what do you define as breathing can actually save your life? And how is that important in learning how to pace yourself?
So this reel that I made, 10 truths that I now believe about life, coming from somebody who spent majority of my life suicidal and depressed. One of the beliefs that I really hold just from my experience is that just taking some time to breathe can really save your life. And for me, that was, it sounds very dramatic, but having come from a background of being suicidal and having self-harming tendencies, if I didn't learn to slow things down by just connecting to my breath, that could have had often quite dire consequences when I was getting caught up in a spiral that would often lead to very destructive, harming tendencies. So for me, that was a very real description of breathing can save your life. But I also feel that this can translate to people who have a tendency to get caught up in a spiral of anxiety and sometimes I feel so, there's a bit of a cosmic joke here because a lot of the advice that I would now give my past self, honestly, if I were to receive that in the moment, I'd be like, seriously? You're telling me to breathe?
Yeah, you cannot really catch yourself and resort other people's advices when you're in a spiral. And I think sometimes in our sessions, I have been in that situation before, like last week.
Yeah, because there's a part of our personality, there's part of our ego that likes things to be complicated. There's a part of our personality that enjoys the suffering of the human condition. And I think it's important to sort of admit that to ourselves and just be able to catch ourselves in that of like, wow, how much am I actually elongating this suffering right now? And I think it takes a lot to admit that because there's something indulgent about being in the suffering. So for me, learning to come back to my breath really was one of the markers of self-love for me. I think self-love is not just this airy fairy of like, oh, I'm going to put a face mask on and I'm going to tell the world that I'm unapologetically me. It's really about being able to hold yourself accountable. And I think for me, using the breath as something that helped me to, I mean, specifically the tangible reason why breath is helpful is because it brings you into the body and out of the mind, right? And this is not to totally discount how wonderful our mind is as a tool, but the mind has this tendency to get us totally ungrounded, right? Totally out of this present moment, spiraling into the past or projecting fears into the future. It's a very, very incredible tool, but when it's not harnessed properly, it can just totally disembody us. So the breath is really this incredible mechanism to bring us right into the body, which is always here. The body is always present and the body cannot lie to you. Whereas the mind can do all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, it's been different stories and narratives, and that's how you spiral.
Exactly. So the body, coming into the body is really about dropping away from all these narratives that are being spun out, and just being here. And there's so much that can open up in just being present for even a couple of minutes.
I think oftentimes as well, we always try to control and see that what is the best that we can do in a situation? How can I fix this? And I think, like you were saying just now, fixing ourselves. And we think that we need to fix a wounded part of ourselves that is considered doing the work. And I want to ask, what exactly is putting in the work? And how do you define doing the work and knowing that you've progressed in your healing journey?
Yeah, yeah. Such a good question. Such a good question. So doing the work for me is really about having the ability to cultivate enough self-awareness that you are gradually, by and by, living less and less from these patterns, from these narratives, from these stories of protection, right? So doing the work is really about meeting the areas in which you are traumatized and working to, going back to that analogy, buff out those dents, right? Because what I see so much of the root of a lot of conflict that we experience in our lives or in the world is because we're so hypersensitive because of these spaces in which we're bruised, right? And I often think of somebody who's traumatized as being like a third-degree burns patient, right? They're so sensitive to the world because of the things that they've been through that even if somebody were to go and give them a hug, that hurts them because they have been so sensitized, right? So there's a lot of compassion to be had here. But at the same time, I really stand by the fact that what happened in your experience, you may not have deserved that, and it wasn't your fault, but it is also your responsibility to deal with it, right? And we can go through the cycles of blame and saying, right, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be this way, this, that, and the other. And you know what? I hold space for that phase of blame. I think blame helps us to identify what the root is. Where it isn't helpful is where we just stop at the person and then we make it their fault. You can use blame as a vessel to help you identify what the root is, and you make peace with it there. And for me, that's what doing the work is about. It's that by and by, as you start to heal these sensitized parts of yourself, you become less reactive to life. You become less reactive to the people around you. And it's not to say that you're totally unresponsive, because you would be dead, right? You're still alive. You're still interacting with life, but it's in a much more open, much more receptive and soft and accepting way. And this is really what makes life just exponentially better, is when you drop into this space of being able to truly receive it exactly the way it unfolds, and to respect that there's a true intelligence and beauty in the way that life is unfolding. Life really opens up in this mysterious and miraculous way that is so far beyond what you could imagine for yourself.
Yeah, I think it's so easy. I remember you saying to me last week that it's always very easy to put yourself in a victim narrative, because I had shown you my astrology chart a while back when I bought my birth certificate. And sometimes what an astrology chart shows you about yourself is your life, and it goes in a very in-depth page reading of where your rising sign is, and all about yourself and the relationship that you have with other people. And sometimes when you're in a relationship, you are always looking to play the victim as I'm the one that's hurt, not them. And how does that impact? And can that oftentimes block us from being able to see both sides of the spectrum and trying to help us look at it in a different lens almost?
Yeah, so when someone is operating from a victim mentality, the first thing obviously is having compassion for why they're in that space, right? Victims are not victims out of nowhere. You know, they're out of circumstances that may have been unpleasant or unfortunate. So I always meet that with a lot of compassion. And at the same time, the victim state can be a very tricky space to get out of, because it is in itself a defense mechanism, right? It's a protection mechanism. The victim is a victim because they've been hurt before and now they are trying to protect themselves. So there's a lot of, as I said, compassion for how one gets there. And at the same time, when somebody is operating from this victim perspective, it is impossible to see the other person's viewpoint because they are in this hyper protection mechanism. And any attempts to see things from another perspective threatens them. So the victim mentality, it's also referred to as the pain body. If you've read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, this is a book that it's basically my Bible. Like, I've read it many, many times at this point. And he speaks to this concept of the pain body, which is essentially this sort of energetic body that we have that is entirely comprised of the pain that we've experienced. And so there's a cleverness to this mechanism as well, because by holding on to the pain and the memories of the pain, we have this very heightened alert system that notifies us if there's any potential situation that could aggravate that level of pain again. So it's beautiful in the sense that, okay, it's keeping me safe, it's keeping me protected. But ironically, what it actually does is it just continues creating those situations. There is always an opportunity to let go in any moment. And even my guru said to me at one point, in relation to these stories around anger that I had when I was younger, he said that I can just drop them, that I can just drop it. And that is really the most graceful invitation for somebody to tell you that you can drop it. And at the same time, that's the most confronting thing for the ego, because if I drop it, who am I? And also, how do you drop it? Like, what do you mean drop it? I can't. I got to work on it layer by layer, right? But even in the Power of Now, somebody says this question, like, you speak about it as if it's so easy to drop. How exactly do you drop it? And he answered with a question, and he said, how would you drop a hot stone? Right. And this is the real, like, when things are not so black and white, but now and then it's good to look at things from a black and white perspective and say, what good is it doing me to hold on to this? Why am I holding on to this hot stone? And there's a nuance here, because we don't want to be bypassing of like, oh no, if it's affecting you, of course, like, let's feel into why there's the clinging to this, right? But when it comes to the process of actually letting go, I can only speak from my own experience, but it truly is a dropping. It is just dropping the story. It's like, this doesn't define who I am or the life that I choose to live anymore. It may have at some point, and I see how that served me. But now, and that's the funny thing about this victim mindset, is actually at one point, that thing kept you safe. That behavior kept you safe. Safe in the sense that you had a container in which you could expand and grow. Over time, because you are a living organism and you are growing, you outgrow that container, and then that becomes a limiting structure. So we need to have the awareness to figure out, when is this thing that was once keeping me safe now keeping me small and limited? And you have to have the courage to break out of that. And the truth is, you're always moving from one container to another, right? You're always shifting from one identity to another. And this is what people find very difficult, specifically because it's challenging to the ego to shift your identity. But it is in human nature to grow. We are constantly shifting. So we need to be ready to surrender these identities and the attachments that we have to these identities.
I like using the narrative of shifting containers, because in my own journey in therapy and through the work that I've done as well, I mean, it's honestly easier said than done to learn to let go. But I realized what the thing I was holding on to so tightly ended up manifesting the outcome and sabotage my relationship, is that when you hold on so tightly, you're not just suffocating yourself, you're also suffocating the other person. Because if you truly love somebody and if you truly cared for them, you would let loose a little bit, you would let them go, allow that space to breathe, allow them to breathe. Because when you hold it so tightly, you are strangling yourself and you feel really, really stressed. And I know it's honestly easier said than done. I took a good few months to be able to wrap my head around the concept of what it means to really let go. And why do you think people are so scared to just let loose a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the hardest things for people to do, to truly let go, because it threatens people, it threatens people's concept of reality. And I find it ironic, or the whole human experience is really characterized by just being so full of paradox, right? In that life itself is completely uncertain in every moment, right? It's completely unpredictable. Anything can happen, right? And if we want to put one definition to the experience of life, it is simply that it is the moment by moment unfolding of infinite potential. So by that definition, we have no idea what is coming. And in fact, this moment, exactly the way it is, will never be repeated again, nor has any moment ever been repeated, nor will it ever be repeated, right? It's like totally original in every moment. So that uncertainty is like literally the only thing we know about life is,
Uncertainty scares everyone.
right? And at the same time, it scares everyone because we don't know, right? And what I find really, really funny about the unknown is we fear the unknown, but the unknown is unknown, right? There's nothing that we know about it, and yet we fear it,
Surprise.
right? What I find interesting about how we fear the unknown is that actually what we're doing is we are projecting our fears into the unknown. So we're not actually afraid of the unknown, we're afraid of what we know, right? Does that make sense? We're projecting what we're afraid of into the unknown, and then therefore saying we're afraid of the unknown. So when it comes to letting go, there's this saying, better the devil that you know than the devil that you don't. Right? I have seen situations, and myself included, I was in an abusive relationship that went on for 6 years. And in the first 6 months, I knew that it wasn't the right thing for me to be in. And yet I held on because I had all of these beliefs around what love was supposed to be, and that things are meant to be hard, and that, it's like hard life now, easy life later. I really had this belief that if you overcome these challenges, somehow there would be some reward at the end for how strong you were or how resilient you were. And actually what I was doing, I was holding on to this out of fear, because even though it was so toxic, it was all that I knew. And even though I knew I was suffering, I didn't know what the alternatives were. I was so terrified of the absolute unknown of everything else. But the irony here is, and actually beautifully, when that relationship did come to an end, which was my decision, I remember being so confronted with these two worlds. And I was like, okay, one world is you stay in this and everything stays the same and it doesn't change and it continues this way. Or you step into a world where anything else is possible. And at the time, I was flat broke, depressed and suicidal, like literally had maybe 150 pounds to my name. I couldn't even afford to move out. And yet, like, I just was like, it's either this or anything else, right? And in that, I literally remember stepping out of that house and realizing, like, holy shit, I've just stepped into a whole new reality of, yeah, sure, the unknown, but that is everything else that is available to me, right? So it's scary because we're stepping away from what is known. And there's, we also have to respect the physiological aspect of us that is trying to keep us safe, right? That's trying to keep us alive. God damn it. We have these survival mechanisms that just very cut and dry say, stay alive. Safe equals alive. Familiar equals safe. So we're just programmed to stay in what is familiar, even if that familiar is our living hell. But we've been blessed with this consciousness, with this awareness to be able to see, hey, I don't need to trade my happiness, my joy for something that is safe just because it's familiar, right? So yeah,
I
not sure
think,
if that fully answered the question.
yeah, it does. Because I also remember you in one of your posts also mentioned that to expand a little bit more, what is pain is a portal, but what does that really mean when we are so used to these ideal set of conditions that we're trying to break free of?
Yeah. So again, going back to this physiological programming, the intelligent system that we have that keeps us alive, right? We are always moving in the directions of being away from pain and towards pleasure, right? And maybe even taking the allure of pleasure out, away from pain and towards safety. But I kind of have this belief that we're in this interesting evolution of humanity where we're sort of upgrading the hardwire, that we're no longer, yeah, this may take a while, but it's been many, many, many years since we were being chased by saber-toothed tigers, right? We still have these very strong fear mechanisms in our system, again, to keep us alive. But what that's manifested into is we tend to shy away from anything that is potentially painful, right? And these days, we are typically not being subjected to a lot of physical potential pain, right? We're not getting mauled by tigers. By and large, people who are in this modern society, we're not having to look out for physical threats to our safety these days. And yet we still have this fear response that is like, what's going to happen? What's around the corner? And we're primed to run away from emotional pain, right? What I have really found in my own experience is going directly into the face of emotional pain is ironically what gets you through it the fastest. And anytime I'm in a space of experiencing pain, I never meet it with the intention to get over it, to get past it. I just meet it, just for the experience of meeting it. And what I found through that is that there's really a difference between pain and suffering, right? So pain, I believe, is in many ways just inherent in life. There are going to be moments that feel painful, right? That feel challenging. I also feel that pain is the very thing that brings us down to this earth, that humbles us. And I love the word humble, humility, because the etymology of that is humus of the earth, right? So to be humbled, to be humiliated is to be brought back down to earth. And pain has this very, very beautiful quality to it. It's almost like a redemptive quality. It brings us back into our body. It brings us into this present moment. It has a way of uniting all these parts of ourselves. And I find that when we really go into the experience of pain, it reminds us of our humanness, and it also signifies like potential for transformation, potential for growth, which again are such human qualities. Whereas the difference with suffering is it's essentially addressing that there is pain present and then making it mean something, and putting all these stories to it of saying, I don't deserve to be in this pain. This shouldn't have happened. If I didn't do this, this wouldn't have happened. If this person didn't do this, this wouldn't have happened. Essentially, suffering is our resistance to the presence of pain in our life.
We need something to feel safe around that.
Yeah. And look, like, let's have compassion for the fact that nobody directly wants to be in pain, right? I mean, unless you're a bit of a masochist, but I feel almost I had a little bit of an upper hand, right? And this is a bit dark, but like having come from the background of being, someone who self-harmed, I definitely had masochistic tendencies. And so with that, I was kind of equipped to go into the realms of shadow work with a real willingness to just be in the face of pain and being like, come on, then show me what you got. Like, I can take it, So it was this really brash approach that I now feel grateful for, because I'm like, oh, I recognize not a lot of people have that ability to just go gung-ho straight into the face of pain. But I feel blessed that I can share from that perspective and be like, hey, you don't need to challenge the face of pain and be like, come on, show me what you got. But there's also a way of humbly meeting pain and recognizing, okay, there is pain here, and I will just sit with it. I'm not here to try and change it. I'm not here to try and make it mean anything. I'm not here to make it, to have it tell me what my worth is. It's none of that. It is simply being present with the experience of pain in this moment and letting that guide the way.
I love that you touched on shadow work because I remember you mentioning to me an analogy about the bunnies, which are really, really cute. And I really journal on the concept of shadow work. And probably a lot of people have heard about shadow work or
Mhm.
parts work. If you guys may have heard of internal family systems, it's also a psychological mechanism that many therapists use. I personally have experienced myself parts work, exploring the different parts of ourselves. What exactly is shadow work in its simplest definition for those of us who have heard it many times?
Yeah, yeah. So as human beings, we're very multifaceted. And again, I don't like to speak too much in black or white terms, but when it comes to shadow work, let's split the human psyche into light and dark. Light being consciousness, that which we are aware of, and dark being unconsciousness, that which we are not aware of. And so it's interesting when we hear people talk about like, it's all love and light. Actually, what sort of really marks the human experience is that, and this whole experience actually of reality is that it's comprised of duality, polarity, light and dark. The contrast is exactly what gives rise to this manifested reality. So, in its simplest terms, what shadow work is the conscious exploration of that which is unconscious. So, what is unconscious typically, again, going back to this idea that we arrived whole, I do really believe that children arrive as pure light, right? Pure awareness. And they're here to explore, they're here to play, they're here to be curious, they're here to learn and grow. And then this aspect of self-rejection comes in. And it doesn't start as self-rejection, but humans are such social creatures. I mean, the most social creatures on this planet. Our babies depend on us for at least, at the very least, like 5 years, right? But in most cases, it's like 18 to even 30 years, right? And we are so dependent on each other for not just nice things, but literally for survival, right? So babies are primed and children are primed to seek approval, to seek belonging, to seek connection, because to belong is to survive. To be pushed out of the tribe is to die. And in that, children are so sensitive. They so, it's literally a survival mechanism to be accepted. And they are so sensitive to any even hint of rejection, because that's immediately a threat to their survival, right? So it can literally be as simple as a child is super excitable and the mum goes, calm down, you're being annoying. That is enough to go, oh my God, cut that excitable behavior out, never display that again, because you'll get kicked out of the tribe and you will die. I know it sounds really dramatic, but to a child, that's what it feels like. And so this begins the process of fragmentation. As we arrive whole, this process of fragmentation takes place where these parts of ourselves break away from that wholeness and get relegated to the shadow. This is what gives rise to the illusion that we are broken and in need of fixing. The wholeness is still very much intact. I almost just think of it as like little slices of the pie that kind of just get pushed down. And the beautiful thing about shadow work is it's this process. Sometimes it's also been referred to as like soul reclamation or soul retrieval. It is the act of lovingly going into these dark spaces and reclaiming these parts of ourselves to integrate them back together into wholeness. And oftentimes shadow work it reveals not only these dark, unpleasant parts of us. Of course, there are certainly, these dark, angry parts, or the parts that are, I don't know, a little bit sticky and a little bit challenging, but it also is often where we hide our most precious gifts. And in my own experience, my exploration of shadow work is what uncovered peace. I was hiding peace in the shadow.
Yeah. I love this. It reminds me a little bit of Harry Potter in the room of I was watching Harry Potter the entire week, and it reminds me of Harry and his deepest, darkest secrets. And in the room of requirements, if you guys are Harry Potter fans, you might know that a lot of the stuff in Harry Potter is hidden, and it's a mystery to uncover one by one. And like you were saying, the parts that are hidden and are fragmented are often ingrained in us as a child, and they follow us through the rest of our lives. And I like that sometimes we talk about the concept of healing our inner child and learning to meet that with love. Is if there's one thing that anyone can self-implement or start from, if they are in a really desperate situation trying to get out of a spiral, what's the one biggest tip? Or where can you really start from? Because one thing that you can really do for yourself in a very spiraling situation, you might not even know where or what to begin. And I would love to get your take on this.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's very different for everyone, and it really depends on where you're at. But I think the most powerful thing one can do for themselves is to really meet themselves where they are, and just to trust that it's okay to take small steps, right? They don't need to be making any huge life changes, because the truth is any radical changes typically are not sustainable in the long term, right? We're always going to be regressing to the norm. And so a more sustainable way of creating change in your life is really just to meet exactly where you are, and meet the edge of where you are, and just slightly press beyond the edge. And it's all you really need to do when it comes to growth. I think we have this idea that things need to change so fast. And when you look to nature, you very rarely see things change dramatically overnight, right? Unless there's a storm that's ripped through, or a wildfire. Typically you see the way that nature maintains a level of equilibrium is this kind of gentle but steady growth. So I think the first thing that people need to do is really meet themselves where they are, and check in with what's present in that meeting of themselves, right? Accountability is a very, very important quality. Being able to sit with the discomfort of where you are right now, being able to sit with the truth of who you are right now, right? And I think oftentimes people shy away from the feeling of being uncomfortable with who they are, because that's very difficult for the ego. I think that when people are feeling a high degree of discomfort with their own company, with their own reflection, to me, that's quite a sweet experience, because what that speaks to is this other aspect of you that says, this is not who I am. This behavior is not who I am. And it's not about shaming that behavior. It's really understanding that I am behaving this way because of all these things that have happened and blah, blah, blah. And it's not about blaming, but it's just about seeing. And so, yeah, this is a really kind of long-winded answer, but there's so many nuances to it. In terms of like spiritual first aid or emotional first aid, if somebody is in a spiral, for me, it's breathing, right? It's really being like returning to yourself with love and saying, hey, I'm not going to let you hurt yourself by going down this spiral. Let's just breathe and slow down, and then we can walk this spiral from there. And we spoke about this kind of changing the dimension of the spiral, right? Where we often talk about this spiral, and a lot of people will know this feeling. It's a very, very intense physical experience of being in the spiral of anxiety, where it feels like everything is kind of just this whirlwind around you. It's like using the breath, and actually even just like calming strokes of the body, right? Listening to the heartbeat and making a intention to slow it down, we can actually kind of change the direction of this spiral away from something that is spiraling us downward, towards a spiral that is bringing us inward. Right? And this is really what I believe triggers are here to do. They're here to call us in. And when we're perceiving it as something that is scary, as a downward spiral, as I'm losing control, we immediately put ourselves into more of a fear state, which makes it a lot worse. If you can catch, oh, I'm in a spiral right now. This trigger is present. Just having that space to note what is present and immediately calling it the inward spiral. Right? Don't give in to this programmed language that says that you're spiraling out of control or that you have some condition where you can't control your emotions. I'm sorry to say it, but that's bullshit. Like you really can. It's about capacity, and it's about having enough love for yourself that you can be there for yourself, right? And you say, this is the inward spiral. I'm being invited into more depth of me. That really helps to just put things into it's still a narrative, it's just putting things into a more helpful narrative. And the clear, very, very quick distinction is moving away from calling it the downward spiral or spiraling out of control or spiraling into oblivion, and calling it the inward spiral, into more awareness, into more of yourself.
I love this, because oftentimes our thoughts create our narrative, creates our story, and our story creates our action, and it all links together. Whatever you manifest is what you put out into the universe, and what will ultimately manifest itself into your body. And pain is real, and I think oftentimes we don't realize until we are in our deepest, darkest moments. That's when we realize that, I want to wrap off by saying from one of Katie's reels that heaven is truly here on earth. And what does that really mean? And how did you come to the realization that heaven is here on earth? And what made you reflect on that to come to it? Because I think it's so beautiful, but we don't realize it most times.
Yeah. So heaven, this idea that heaven is a place on earth, I even like to bring it even deeper in the earth is our body, right? That heaven is really here in this earthly vessel. We conceptualize the idea of heaven as something that is this destination that we're heading towards. Possibly we go there after we die, if we behave well in this lifetime. And I find that I can see the allure of having something beautiful to aim towards. And at the same time, there's something a lot more real about what I've uncovered anyway, that heaven is truly a state of being and a state of perceiving life. And it's a combination of having a regulated nervous system, having a mind that is in service to the heart, and letting an open heart be where we receive life totally openly. And when you're in this space of the body being balanced, the mind being in service to the heart, and the heart being the space through which we experience life, this is really where you just get so filled with something beyond you. You get so filled, you get so inspired by life itself. And I love the word inspired because it means to be filled by spirit, right? And these kind of things in their balance puts you in this space where you are just so open to life exactly as it unfolds, not out of being defeated into that reception, right? But like truly, truly being like, whoa, this is fucking beautiful in all of it, right? In all of it. Like that's truly what characterizes beauty for me, is like, for me, there's something about the thorn that makes a rose that bit more beautiful. I don't know how to describe it, but there's this element of like the fact that life can be so savage sometimes is what really gives rise to how sweet it can be. And when you build capacity in the body, mind, and spirit and heart, all of that comes together in the heart, to actually be able to open up to life and receive it in its full spectrum, this is the experience of heaven on earth. And you recognize that heaven is not some place that is out there that we're trying to journey towards. It really is in how we are able to receive life totally openly. And again, like speaking to the fact that suffering is essentially just resistance to what is. So the opposite of suffering is no resistance to what is. And when you meet life in this, so let's say hell is suffering, heaven is the opposite, right? Yeah, I mean, not even pleasure. It's just heaven is just being, right? Heaven is like absolute peace, absolute bliss, absolute just like just the feeling of, yeah, I mean, it's just all is good, right? But even then, it's like not just on that. Because for me, the experience of heaven is that there's no polarity here. There's no need to even judge something as, oh, this is good, but this is bad. There's just no suffering at all. And it's
nothing to do.
well, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to enjoy. And it's funny about this. I went through a few months of this, of really being in this space of like, wow, heaven really is a place on earth. And then I was like, there's nothing to do. Everything's so perfect here. I don't need to do anything. Everything's provided for. And then there was almost this nudge of being like, hey, you can do things. So go and do things. You didn't just come here to be like, oh, I'm going to sit on my ass my whole life. You know, yeah, but what I've really understood is that it's just a case of suffering or not. Right? And it's not to say that heaven doesn't have pain in it, but there's a beauty in that pain. You see how, for me, the experience of heaven on earth is like, you see how everything is perfectly designed, how every part of your experience is perfectly designed, and that none of it was here to make you suffer. And at the same time, even the act of suffering is an act of grace, because it is only through suffering that we come to realize the futility of suffering and the pointlessness of suffering, right? But you have to go through it for long enough to then be like, wait, why am I doing this? Okay, pain is there, but suffering doesn't need to be there. But we have to go through the suffering in order to know that. So yeah, it's challenging to describe, but I really believe that it's available for everyone who feels called to seek it, to just play with the possibility that perhaps heaven is a place on earth, and perhaps heaven is more a state of being rather than somewhere, some kind of refuge or some perfect set of conditions that you find yourself in. Heaven is really this realm of an inner state that is so wide open and so blissful and so open to receiving life exactly the way it is, that there's no need to change, to control, to create any resistance. It's just letting it move through you.
So much to be grateful for at the end of the day. I think if there's anything that I personally take away from, or this podcast in itself has so much wisdom, and I kept going back to certain topics and certain questions because I really believe that Katie has so much wisdom to share, the way she frames words. And I think sometimes just changing the narrative of the way you see things and frame things can honestly make you feel like, wow, how did I not see this from a different lens? It's like the concept with the rose or the thorn. Why this and not something else? We're always constantly comparing and wanting something more. And I honestly encourage any of you who feel that if you're stuck somewhere, the first thing I did was honestly go to Katie's Instagram. And I just found so much wisdom and content. And what is the best way to get started if somebody wants to work with you, or should they be aligned at a certain point in their lives in order to get started to be working with you?
Yeah, thank you so much for those lovely words of affirmation. And yeah, it's always nice to receive. It's really challenging for me to receive actually when people comment specifically on the wisdom aspect, because I'm like, and I spoke with my guru about this, I was like, it's not my wisdom, it's just, you know, it's just what moves through me. And but also receiving that, and I'm very grateful for your reflections. For people to work with me, I invite that they enjoy the content that I've put out there and the podcast episodes, and every now and then I erratically share YouTube videos. So anything that I've got out there, I invite people to play with. I've also just started a program called Source of Peace, which I feel I'll continue running multiple times through the year, because it feels really like something that is coming from such an embodied space. So that's a 4-week program that kind of explores all these different facets of peace, not only intellectually what the experience of peace is, but somatically. And essentially the intention of it is to return people to the realization that we are very much our own source of peace. And going beyond that, what we are is a conduit for peace to flow through. And I do also work one-to-one on sort of very specific basis. What I'm looking for the most is a readiness and an openness. So I used to work specifically within the realm of trauma and shadow work, and I feel that I've kind of moved beyond that now, and I have so much respect for people who are still in that space. But for me, the biggest place that I'm in service to is kind of beyond needing to understand the stories, beyond being in the victim narrative. I'm really here to work with people who are dedicated to exploring consciousness and stabilizing into a space of living from a higher state of consciousness. Right? We are at a time in this humanity where we're awakening at a very, very rapid pace. The veils are dropping. A lot is happening around the world, and we are really being called forth into more and more awareness. And this is what I'm here to serve. I'm less here to dismantle old paradigms. I'm more about kind of building this template for the new earth, right? And I also shared on my Instagram, the new earth is not some mystical realm. Again, same as heaven on earth, like it is the state of being. So I'm really here to work with people who are ready to embody a clear, open, receptive state of being that allows life to move through them in a way that is less and less restricted.
We have
More
so much to be thankful for.
We really do. We really do. And one thing I'll finish off with is like, all of this is in the name of liberation, right? All of this is in the name of being free to live life in a way that you feel fully alive. That's what this is all about.
You don't know where to start. Start with the breath, because really, if you can't pace yourself, then how do you even start to begin doing any work at all? It's really start from the basics.
Yeah.
And there's no do-over in life. I used to ask myself, if there was a do-over button, can I restart from scratch? And we can't, but we can reset from the breath. I think that's what taught me. It's not about investing in a self-help book. It's not about journaling as much as you can, but it's about starting from within and knowing that you are in a safe space with the capacity to breathe. And I will leave Katie's link to the Source of Peace and her Instagram and to her podcast as well. So thank you so much. And I hope you guys took away a lot from this episode, because I'm sure I did as well. And I've taken a lot of notes from Katie, and I'm really honored to have her here. And just, it's so inspiring to hear true stories from both of us. And I hope you guys took something away. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast. And yeah, I will say, if you're looking for somewhere to start in the mirror.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys next time. Bye. Welcome back to the Flow of Cheryl podcast. It's been quite some time since I last showed up on this podcast. So today we have
the wonderful, wonderful Katie Jonzen, and she is a light worker. And I have done a few coaching sessions with her. And today's episode is going to be all about finding inner peace and what it really means, the journey back into wholeness, and what does it really mean to heal from grief, finding the answers within ourselves, and also searching deeper. One that I know Katie has a lot of wisdom to share, and I personally have taken away a lot of notes from her coaching calls and simply from her Instagram reels in itself. So I'm excited for you guys to share, for her to share the wisdom with you and really impart that knowledge. And because I've learned so much from her, and she's also the founder of the Seed of Peace podcast, and it's such an honor to be able to have her here to share the wisdom. So without further ado, let's get started in today's episode.